Hello, everybody. I am Lloyd Hendricks,
I'm Cristal De Leon.
and we are here for our intercultural communication course for Dr. M to talk a little bit about our French culture project that I worked kind of hard on, and Crystal worked really hard on, quite frankly. I want to say, just for the record, I really appreciate that Dr. M gave me Crystal as a partner because she always writes really well, and I was really impressed with everything that she's done for sure. And I'm not saying that because I'm fishing for compliments. I really mean that, by the way. I'm not messing around when I say that.
Give
But we're
yourself
gonna
some credit, Lloyd. Come on.
Oh, I mean, I'm good like sometimes, but I'm not kidding. Everything I've ever read from you has always been so good. So when I saw your name, I was like, oh, thank God.
Thanks.
Anyway, we're going to take a look at a couple of PowerPoints and then talk a little bit about it and see how it goes. And we decided to do it more of a podcast format. So hopefully it's not too terribly boring for anybody who ends up seeing this. So let's take a little look here. I'll share my screen and get started on that right here. Like if it's coming up okay. This is the Cristal and Lloyd Show. Welcome to the first inaugural Cristal and Lloyd Show. Maybe the last one. I don't know. She's about to graduate. She'll probably never speak to us again. I imagine we'll see here. But we wanted to do it this way because we just feel like it's a lot more fun, quite frankly. So we're going to be doing a little project about exploring French culture and getting a comprehensive understanding of the culture side here at first. So French culture really holds a very prominent global position due to its sophistication and diversity. It's profoundly influenced philosophy, literature, art, fashion, and even cuisine worldwide, which is one of my favorites as a fat guy, of course. Rooted in a really rich history of political and also social transformation, French culture values traditions and respect. And this presentation here is going to explore French culture throughout the historical development, the social norms, and some of the signature elements that really shape the national French identity. And of course, mention the fact that visitors can enjoy great sights, great food, and some really immersive cultural experiences. So, one of the big foundations of French society, of course, in the evolution of French identity, of course, was the French Revolution from a couple of hundred years ago. It was what really brought France, in many ways, into the modern world. It really transformed France's political and social systems, establishing the freedom, the equality, and the brotherhood as the core principles that guide a lot of modern democratic values and civil rights, even in other places around the world today. There's also, of course, the Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau that challenged the traditional authorities, embedding reason, individual liberties, and free communication into French social values. And of course, the city of Paris is known very well worldwide as quite an intellectual hub. Paris is still remaining a center for the artistic movements, philosophy, progressive social change, very much reflecting the country's sort of ongoing commitment to intellectual freedom. This is a really cool one. I love this saying. It's one of my favorites. French society very much tries to balance individualism with collectivism, and it's reflected in, of course, the little phrasing there. Individual rights, of course, are important. French culture emphasizes personal independence and critical thinking, especially nurtured through the education and the artistic expressions in the country. But they also value community and tradition. Family is extremely much, very much central with social rituals and national holidays like Bastille Day, for example, fostering a lot of unity and some shared heritage. And there's also, of course, equality and social responsibility. The public institutions trying to promote equal opportunities around the country, reflecting France's real commitment to social justice and to the collective welfare. So here we are. This is the one that, like we were talking about earlier, really trips me up. Laicity. I was telling Crystal earlier, I watched a YouTube video to try and figure out how to pronounce it, properly, but it's very, very difficult. But secularism is very much a defining norm in France. The separation of church and state is really essential. Established in law, written in law, first in 1905 and later on again when France redid their constitution a couple of times. Laicite ensures religion is separate from public life and politics, promoting neutrality and equality, which of course, is different from a lot of places. Like here in the U.S., you've got people arguing about that kind of stuff. The impact on, religious symbols being banned in public schools, for example. So the impact on education is pretty strong because they want to have a very much neutral environment for all the students in schools. And it's also led to a lot of contemporary debates, and that's what we'll get into a little bit deeper later on But the discussions today often focus on Muslim religious symbols in public spaces, and how difficult that might be to balance the official, state position of secularism with the cultural diversity and the integration that we see in the modern sort of world. Now, here's one of my favorite spots, of course, the food. French cuisine is very much a art form rooted in a tradition, long tradition of culinary excellence. French cuisine is renowned for the complexity and the delicacy, with regional specialties often shaped by the local geography, and also by the history of the area and what people ate, years and years ago. Meals are also social rituals. It's not just about, grabbing a bite to eat, running and going. It's very much about sort of a communal experience, a leisurely, enjoyable experience, not just a quick, munch down and go. But it emphasizes very much quality ingredients, and of course presentation. And then, of course, also family or friends or whoever bonding over the shared food, and especially, of course, the wine. Now, French wine heritage rather is pretty central and pretty important. But especially in a couple of different regions like Bordeaux and Champagne, that produces very, very fine wines that complement the local dishes, reflecting very much the national pride. And just a small tidbit there of history for you. There was a time in the early 1900s whenever French grapes were going through something of a blight period, and they were actually saved and kind of fused with some American breeds of grapes, which is kind of interesting. Not a lot of people know they buy French wines, but in some cases, there might actually be American grapes that made those French wines today, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. So, and of course, here's a subject that I'm a master in. Let me tell you, I assure you, I'm a big master in in the French fashion game and innovation. The fashion sort of scene in France has got very much strong historical roots. Charles Frederick Worth pioneered the haute couture, and he would actually dress royalty. He'd set new luxury standards for people in the country, and of course, also around the world. There's also iconic designers like Chanel, Dior, Givenchy. Is that how you pronounce that, Cristal? I don't even know, to be honest with you. You know how to pronounce that?
Givenchy,
Givenchy.
maybe.
Here you go. Yeah, see, like I told you, I'm a master of the design, not the speech, right? But but of course, the French fashion's got global influence, and craftsmanship is always important. And then there's the Paris Fashion Week, which the picture here on the slide came from. It's pretty much the world's premier fashion event, showcasing a lot of cutting edge trends and innovation annually. But one thing that, you see it kind of every year when Fashion Week hits, right? You see like the little pictures of like people wearing these crazy, outrageous outfits and things like that. And you're like, oh my goodness, what in the heck are they doing? That's not quite necessarily what people would wear every day. And so the everyday style is also very, very important to the French people. French fashion blending sort of a casual chic with a real effortless kind of elegance, reflecting some sophistication well beyond the runways. And it's true. When I lived in England, like I didn't ever get to actually go and visit France, but I did meet a lot of French people, and they always just look so nice. I don't know how they do it. You know what I mean? Like I need to hire a French designer or something to, or fashion, consultant or something like that for my own self. I don't know. They always look so good. It's almost annoying, frankly, isn't it?
They make it look very effortless for sure.
I'm telling you, it's true. Uh, so moving on to the arts, it's a real national commitment to beauty and expression. Obviously, that kind of stems, you can see in the Fashion Week stuff, but there's also a lot of world-renowned museums. There's the Louvre, and go ahead, I'll let you pronounce. Is that Musée d'Orsay?
Oh, you're on your own on this
Yeah, I
one.
know, right, right. I know ours are so difficult to read in French.
Yeah.
I was really trying for this last few days on YouTube videos. I worked really hard at it, and I didn't learn a thing. It's pretty sad, actually. And then, of course, the Pompidou Center, I'll just call it that, housing some of those iconic Western art masterpieces. There's also, of course, oh, there we go. Art that's very accessible. Art's available to everybody through museums, street performances, and some open air exhibitions, which is pretty cool. I've always enjoyed street art probably more than fancy museums myself. And also just reflecting that sort of French commitment to the beauty and the expression. There's a lot of government support, lots of funding to preserve the artistic heritage of the country and foster creativity, maybe necessarily nationwide, maybe worldwide. But it's also, of course, very important to the cultural identity of French people, as the art will reflect some of those French values of beauty and imagination, critical thinking, and enriching society altogether. Now, just to give it kind of a wrap up here, the tapestry of French culture. You've got your historical legacy, French culture shaped by those revolutionary ideals and those intellectual traditions that still influence the world today. You've got social harmony, that balance of individualism, collectivism, and secularism, defining contemporary French society. The artistic and culinary excellence, where France can give you those unforgettable experiences through food and fashion, and the dedication to the arts. And then, of course, the invitation to explore. You hear like French people, you hear that sort of like, um, you know, sort of what is it like? I guess a reputation for being kind of rude that you hear about
Hmm.
from
A
people.
little cold. Hmm.
Yeah, I've heard that plenty of times. I don't know. Like the people I met when I lived in London were always really nice. Now maybe they were not in France, but everyone I ever met told me, hey, if you go to Paris, maybe some people will be rude, but by and large, everywhere else you go, some people are gonna be very, very friendly for the most
They
part.
say never judge a book by its cover.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. So, did you anything kind of catch your eye there as we went through my slides on that side there?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a couple questions for you.
Okay.
First one is, what are some examples that show how traditions unify French society?
Well, the best one I thought was really cool was the Bastille Day celebrations. First of all, Bastille Day is July the 14th, which is my birthday, so that's kind of always a fun one. I didn't know what it meant as a kid. I just heard, oh, Bastille Day in France, that's neat. But yeah, Bastille Day is celebrated today. It's almost in many ways similar to the 4th of July here in the United States, when they stormed the Bastille and freed the prisoners during the French Revolution. The Bastille, of course, was a prison, and it's just one of those things. It's like a monumental thing in the past. It maybe is in some ways also similar to Guy Fawkes Night in the United Kingdom. Even though Guy Fawkes actually his plan was to blow up Parliament, which is kind of a bad thing. It's sort of remembered as an ideal in like resisting tyranny or along those lines, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned the French Revolution, and that kind of triggered another question. In what ways does France's revolutionary motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, still shape its society today?
Well, that's a really, really important motto to a lot of people. Those sort of ideals are still, codified in French civil rights laws and in national values and whatnot. There's even actually, they're going to see that in all the buildings, a lot of government buildings, things like that. There's a funny scene. I don't know if I've told you this, but one of the courses I teach is a film history class, and
Hmm.
we watched the movie Casablanca. And there's a scene in the beginning where one of the like sort of rebel guys, fighting against the German occupations. They're of course, in French Morocco. They're not in France, but they're in French Morocco. So there's French police, but they basically work for the Germans. They're asking him for his papers, and he's, oh, I don't think I have many. Tries to take off and run. They shoot him and they kill him, and he dies right there below the court building, right there below the liberty, equality, and fraternity sign, which is kind of funny, and he just kind of like really stick it to him, like he's definitely not receiving any liberty, fraternity, or equality right there, or brotherhood. But it's very important today, and in fact, there's also even kind of a movement today to add the word laicity to that saying as well as like the
Ah,
official motto of
interesting.
the country, which is pretty interesting to sort of like define that secularism as a real big thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna,
Absolutely.
all right, I'm gonna hit stop share here, and I'll let you take a look and
Okay,
see what you got for us.
perfect. If you can let me share, please, that'd be awesome. And then Lloyd got the fun part. Now we're gonna talk about some conflict, which, it's not the best thing to talk about, but I think it's important to address. So let's see if I can pull this up. Perfect. All right.
Back to the show. Hey.
Back to the show. Yeah. All right. So we're going to be talking about the intercultural conflict between France and Muslim immigrant communities. So let me move this so I can properly see. All right, so the intercultural conflict between France and Muslim immigrants is a complex clash between French secular universalism and collectivist faith-oriented identities. This tension is most visible in debates over religious dress, particularly in the Muslim headscarf hijab and the full face covering the niqab and the burqa. At its core, this conflict represents fundamental differences in values regarding identity, visibility, public space, gender power, and the limits of inclusion in the French Republic. Understanding this conflict requires examining deeper cultural dynamics that shape these tensions. So, a big thing that we're going to be talking about is understanding cultural differences and the values that come with that. So, laicite, the foundation of French secularism. I'm trying to put my little Spanish in there
it's
to make
it's
it sound a
tough.
little bit more French.
It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. So the assertive secularism. So France implements its distinctive secular model through laïcité, actively working to remove religion from public areas, especially schools and government facilities. Now, they really do this to have more of a unified sense among the country. I guess, again, civic identity. So citizens are expected to be subordinate personal beliefs to a collective civic identity, leaving religious, ethnic, or linguistic differences behind when entering the public life. Now, you might assume this is where the cultural challenge comes in. The system worked well in historically Catholic and ethnically, see, now I'm trying to do French, Spanish, and English homogeneous state, but was challenged by the arrival of Muslim immigrant populations with diverse cultural norms. So let's look at a bit of a breakdown of the timeline of the headscarf controversy. So in 1989, there was the Creole incident. This is where 3 Muslim girls were expelled from school for refusing to remove their headscarves, sparking the first affaire de la fleur and a national debate about secularism. In 2004, France banned ostentatious religious symbols in public schools, effectively targeting Muslim girls who wore the hijab despite applying to yarmulkes and large crosses. In 2010, France enacted a nationwide ban on full face coverings in all public spaces, drawing both domestic support and international criticism. So the ongoing tensions, Muslim women pushed back, arguing these laws misrepresented their beliefs and erased their agency as a hijab serves as many purposes beyond religious expression. And now we're going to talk more about the clash of the worldviews. So from the French perspective, the French ideal promotes a universal public identity where religion is private and personal. Neutrality means active exclusion of religious symbols from public spaces. Now, from the Muslim perspective, we've got many Muslims embrace a collective identity where faith is a lived, visible, and communal practice. The headscarf represents more than just a garment. It's a tangible expression of identity. When we look back at the French perspective, this creates a double bind. So Muslim citizens are asked to integrate and adopt French values, but when they do so while maintaining visible markers of identity, they are penalized. Now, in a source that we have in our research paper, the body Gendro, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, to an outsider, particularly a Muslim outsider, the recent law banning the headscarves is stunning. Who would have thought a piece of cloth would threaten the stability of the French state? So that's a pretty heavy statement to make when we're talking about the intercultural conflict. So now let's look at some theoretical concepts that we can use to really take a deeper dive on why this intercultural conflict is happening. So we're looking at the cultural dimensions. So the individualism versus collectivism. French institutions emphasize personal freedom and universal citizenship, while Muslim communities often come from the collective societies where religious identity connects the community and tradition. So as you can see already, there's a very big conflict going on between the values of French versus Muslim. The uncertainty avoidance. So France shows a high uncertainty avoidance through numerous laws regulating public life, while many Muslim communities have lower uncertainty avoidance, accepting religious diversity as natural. Now let's look at the cultural perception. Now the French state sees it as a secular laws as equal and protective, but on the other hand, the Muslims experience them as culturally oppressive. The second theoretical concept that we looked at was face negotiation. So from the face work competence, this is the ability to skillfully manage face during conflict. Now we've got the negative face, which French emphasis on autonomy and non-imposition. And then we've got the positive face, which really resembles the Muslims' emphasis on recognition and inclusion. Now the face negotiation theory proposed by Stella Toomey explains how identity, dignity, and social harmony are managed during conflict. In France, mismatched face concerns create cycles of misunderstanding. French state values negative face, which is autonomy, while Muslim communities emphasize that positive face, recognition of group and identity. Now, the differences lead to a preventative and restorative face work strategies that often deepen the conflict, as one group's expression of identity is perceived as threatening by the others. So when it's talking about this, it's really each community is holding strong in their beliefs, and there really isn't a lot of room for compromise, which is creating a deeper divide.
Cool.
So the third theoretical concept we looked at was high context versus low context communication. So in low context, which is where we're going to talk about France, is a direct, explicit communication with clear rules. In high context, where we look at the Muslim communities, it's relational, implicit communication with shared meaning. And then the communication gap, where the misunderstanding is happening due to the different communication styles. Under Edward T. Hall's theory, explains how France's low context cultures rely on direct verbalized communication with explicit laws and policies. Meanwhile, many Muslim immigrant communities come from high context cultures where communication is more relational, embedded in nonverbal cues. This mismatch means policies that seem fair to French lawmakers can feel intrusive to Muslim citizens. The implementation of low context approaches without adapting to high context standard intensifies conflicts rather than resolving them. So let's look a little further. So what can we do to solve this cultural communication conflict that's happening? We can do community participation, which involves Muslim leaders, scholars, and civil groups in policy decisions. That way you can get a full view on how it's gonna impact communities. Not We can talk specifically about the Muslim communities because this is what our presentation over, but I think holistically, this is a good practice to input to make sure that communities are feeling at least heard and respected.
Yeah, with like everybody. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's incredibly important in today's kind of climate for sure. And then we've got the pluralistic model where it recognizes, again, diverse identities with a shared civic space. It's really important to have that open conversation. Then we've got local mediation, which we can implement cultural councils as well to help with that. And then we've got public education, improved representation of complex meanings of religious dress. I think one of the things that I touched about that was that removal of religious symbols from schools, but however, that garment is much more than a religious symbol for
Right.
Muslim communities. So understanding that will help a little bit with this conflict. So long-term solutions should include cultural competence training for officials, increase political representation for minorities, and enhance intercultural education. Without acknowledging cultural differences, secular laws can unintentionally threaten cultural dignity and contribute to alienation, which is something we really want to avoid. All right, that's all I had for you.
Hey.
That was a mouthful,
It
but
is, isn't
can
it?
you let me know out of all of that, do you have a couple questions for me?
I was wondering a little more on your thoughts about the laicity, like how it influences like the public policy and the sort of cultural expectations across France.
Yeah, absolutely. So the laicite mandates a strict separation of religion from public life, and it creates a public sphere where personal religious symbols are restricted and aiming for civil equality. However, even though this is a choice that France makes, it's important to also understand if they're talking about unity, if they're talking about making sure everybody feels included, that they're also widening their perspective on what symbols actually mean to different communities. Because if you
Right.
don't do that, like I mentioned earlier into the slide, you're unintentionally then threatening their
Yeah.
religious beliefs or other values that they may have. And that's something you definitely don't want to do. And I think that's something they've noticed with all the protests and backlash that they've received from those type of legislations that they put out.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of was going to ask you a little bit about as well was the like ways that a law could appeal, but you kind of really said what I was thinking just now was ways that like a law could appear neutral to most people on paper, but in fact without realizing it, because it's only fair. Nobody can wear a religious symbol. Nobody can cover their face. But, for some people they have to do that, right?
Mhm.
So what were a little bit more your thoughts on ways they can feel discriminatory to people that might be in a Muslim minority or any other kind of minority, I guess, that's religious.
Yeah, so you touched on a good point, and the neutrality thing, I think in the context of the French, they really see it as a unifier. They don't want to separate too much when it comes to their citizens, but unfortunately, with those bans, it does seem discriminatory because, as you mentioned, the Muslim community, those hijabs and other different type of garments that they use have so many different meanings behind them. And if you now go and tell them, well, you can't wear that in public because it's not accepted, that
Right.
is very
Right.
discriminatory towards their community. And I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had openly to discuss that and address it properly with not only the Muslim communities, but other communities that have
Yeah.
different symbols. For example, for myself, I'm a huge Catholic. I love my religion, and I will wear my little cross necklaces.
Yeah.
I've got a tattoo here with a
I
miraculous
see. Yeah.
medal. This is the main symbol. So if that's something now that our government comes to me and says, "Well, make sure you cover up your tattoo and make sure you don't wear your necklace that has a cross on it," I will definitely feel some sort of way about it because it's not necessarily, I don't perceive it as a negative, um, but they might. So there's
Yeah.
a deeper conversation that needs to be had on understanding perspectives and
You,
coming to a compromise.
it's like you say, it's kind of as a teacher, that's sort of my thought process too, is it really involves education. You may be doing your best to make what you think and seems like it would be a fair law without realizing it's unintentionally unfair to some people like, that want to be able to wear their cross or have their tat or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I like that. And then I could see how that would be very upsetting to some people and cause some of these protests and things as well.
And I think that embodies essentially what we've learned throughout this class, intercultural communication, is really having that open lens of understanding different types of communication and knowing that,
Yeah.
there's certain situations communication is used, but maybe don't take it too personal. Try to figure out where it's coming from and understanding and trying to get to a place of compromise.
I'm with you. Well, I think we pretty much hit everything, and I feel like that really wraps up the inaugural episode of the Crystal and Lloyd show. Just want to say thanks to you again, Crystal, for all of your hard work, and I guess that'll do it. We'll sign her
Yeah.
off.
Well, thank you, Lloyd.
All right, have a great night.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.